Okay.
All right, everybody. It's time to shut up because the college is in progress. Hey, sit down.
No, Chase.
All right, so the College of Complexes is now in session. Here are a couple rules. Sorry. First rule is one full at a time. That means when somebody else is talking, you are not talking. And then the second rule is no personal attacks. The format is as follows. We're going to have a brief announcements period. That's where you come up and you give announcements and announcements only. Then we're going to have the speaker give their presentation. They will have up to an hour. After the presentation, we'll have the Q&A session where the folks can ask questions of the speaker. Followed by the Q&A, we'll have the rebuttal period where you'll have several minutes to give a rebuttal, followed by the final rebuttal where the speaker shall give a final rebuttal for up to 5 minutes. So I will lead off announcements. Who here is a registered Chicago voter? All right, I got a petition that calls for a referendum to make the mayor a recallable position. So if you guys are interested in signing, I'll certainly pass it around. All right, thank you.
All right, Charlie, go ahead with your announcements.
All right, everyone, welcome to meeting number 3,809 of the College of Complexes, the playground for people who think. Okay, although I am not a capitalist, I will give an advertisement for our upcoming programs. On March 22nd, we will have an open mic. We have 3 keynote speakers lined up to get things going, but the topic will be, what do you think we should do to make the world a better place? So get working on your contribution to an open microphone on the 22nd. On the 29th, political analyst Eric Mao will be returning to talk all about wealth. What is wealth? How it is distributed? Probably social stratification, whatnot. What is wealth? That brings into April the 5th, transitioning the single payer medical coalition will be returning to bring us an update on socialized medicine across the nation. They have an action pending in the city council. On April the 12th, we're going to have 2 lectures in conjunction with the celebration of Earth Day. On the 12th, the Illinois Environmental Council, the Chicago representative of an agency coalition of 100 environmental organizations, will be talking about IEC and a variety of issues. Very relevant today, given what's happening with EPA and environmental legislation in the nation. It's slowly disappearing. On April the 19th, yours truly, Charles Paydock, I will have a question and answer quiz, which each of you will take to determine what is your green view of politics. Are you a polluter, a friend of the polluter, or are you a friend of the earth? Should be an interesting program. Very quickly, with a PowerPoint presentation. Then on April 26th, a former member of Congress, Marie Newman, we're talking about how to organize the movement, how to be a good activist. She's got all kinds of ideas and has put these in a book. A very animated speaker, highly recommended event. That leaves open 4 days, 8th in May. We're looking for a special May Day speaker on organized labor. Any topic. On May the 10th, Eric Mello will return again. And he's going to be talking about multipolar politics. Multipolar politics. Find out what he's talking about. Okay, thank you very much. I have one announcement myself. For those of you interested in it, at 1 o'clock tomorrow will be the regular monthly meeting of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. I will gain you entrance if you would like to attend and observe the issues that are pending in the labor community in Chicago from an IWW perspective. Okay, sir, thank you. Take it away.
Okay, go ahead and give your announcement.
I'm Jan Budar, and on the 27th of March, the Nuclear Energy Information Service will be presenting a program. The speaker will be Mark Z. Jacobson, who has taught at Stanford for 31 years and has written a textbook on the composition of the atmosphere. He will be discussing hydrogen gas, the production of hydrogen gas, the transportation of it, and the uses of it, and how much it costs to produce hydrogen gas. That will be 7 p.m. on the 27th, which is the last Thursday of the month. And if you would like, you have to register to come to the Zoom meeting. And if you want an invitation, my email is my name, Jan Budar, the numeral 1, at Gmail. So it's pretty simple if you know how to spell my name. janbudar1 at gmail.com.
Okay, Justin, you want to introduce our speaker? All right, we're going to give you an introduction, Laura, and then we're going to put you right on.
All right. Our speaker, Reverend Laura M. George, JD, Executive Director of the Oracle Institute and the Peace Pentagon. Our purpose is twofold: empower women and end war. It's that simple. The evolutionary impulse supports an upgrade to the human experiment. Unless we collectively progress into a future that works for all, in caps, we will lose civilization. We are determined to do what has never been done before. We are united around people. We are uniting people around the globe to shift the paradigm. We, the people, possess the consciousness and technology to attain what our ancestors could not achieve: partnership and peace. Solving the other issues of the polycrisis will then be possible, including protecting our precious planet and ensuring ethical AI pregnant Earth. Ethical AI. Pregnant Earth. Our first task will be a planetary coalition of partnership and peace. Our second goal is to grow the Global Women's Congress and publish the Founding Mothers Proclamation. Then in 2025, the Founding Mothers will commence international nonviolent campaigns to accomplish our humanitarian goals. Throughout this journey together, we will demonstrate courage, wisdom, persistence, and patience. We will trust our partners and maintain faith that in our cause is virtuous and for the benefit of all. Let's welcome Dr. Laura M. George, JD.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I'm happy to be back. I spoke here a couple years ago. When I spoke the last time, we had already moved out of the interfaith work. That is why we started the Oracle Institute, and we were working on peace building. And then Roe got reversed. We got the Dobbs decision. Democracy Index declined for yet another year. And then Trump arrived. So we, at the Peace Pentagon, after first learning about Project 2025, and I think I learned about it in the fall of 2023, realized we were in serious trouble. I don't know if any of you have read Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains, but she does a stupendous job of showing us that this conservative, which now I think we're in full-on oligarchy movement, backs up way before Reagan, which is when many people back it up. It actually started with Brown versus Board of Education. And it started in my state, which shocked me when I learned this. All the records were kept in Virginia. The University of Virginia, my alma mater, originally hosted the Evil Geniuses. They then got kicked out of UVA and moved to Virginia Tech. Then they got kicked out of Virginia Tech and they moved to George Mason University in Arlington. And that's where the real brain behind Project 2025, or what he died before they actually named it that, but the brain behind all of this was a guy named James Buchanan, who actually won the Nobel Prize in economics. And when he died, Nancy McLean got the keys to the kingdom. They had literally saved every piece of paper from the 1950s forward. So I'm going to highly recommend that everybody read A Democracy in Chains if you want to know who's in the Star Chamber. So in response to all of that, we started the Founding Mothers Movement. And I have a presentation I'm going to show. Let me get it. Slideshow from beginning.
Okay.
All right, is everything looking good?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the brand is obviously a play on the Founding Fathers, and many people think this is an Americentric movement, but we like to point out that every nation was started by men. I don't think women were involved at the founding of any of the nation states in a serious manner. So yes, this is a planetary project, and we are focused on partnership and peace. You can flip the coin, that means women in war. So this was from the original white paper, and I'm going to read this quote by Rianne Eisler, who's very well known for writing The Chalice and the Blade. Partnerism is a new social category that transcends the conventional polarities between right and left, capitalism and communism, religion and secularism, and even masculinism and feminism. We must unlink masculinity from domination and violence, and femininity from subordination and obedience. So yes, our vision is to transition humanity. We've been on the verge of this paradigm shift now for decades, and sadly, it's going in the wrong direction. And the last time we had a paradigm shift of this magnitude, the Roman Empire fell. We went into 2,000 years of darkness. Christendom did at any rate. Thank God the Muslims kept libraries and kept the best we had achieved thus far in science and health and math and all of that. But Christendom went in the Dark Ages, and we didn't come out of that until the Renaissance. So this is a very serious matter, as we all know. We're also going to deal with militarism. We're going to deal with patriarchy and privilege. And the objectives are gender equity and global peace. And the reason that those are the two main goals is because when we look at this onion and peel the layers off, each layer being yet another, element of the polycrisis, we feel that women in war are at the center of this. And if we can attain gender equity and peace, everything changes. So I'm going to go through the slide deck. You're going to see that we've built on the suffragettes, who were the leaders at the height of the peace building movement in the world. This is when the Kellogg-Briand Pact was passed. It was supposed to be the treaty to end all wars. So Julia Ward Howe issues this Mother's Day proclamation after the Civil War. And Mother's Day was not intended to be about gift cards and chocolates. It was a call to action. And the women of the world heard. They had their first meeting in 1878 in Paris. And then it sort of fell into just being on a back burner sort of thing. They still have a women's congress every few years, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but it's more turned into like a conference. But we looked at their strategy. How did they do it? So back then, they unified the women's groups, which also were working on, child labor issues, the peace groups, and back then it was churches. And if this had existed 100 years ago, I'm sure they would have invited the environmental and indigenous groups to get on board. So we are following their same template because it worked once before, and I think it can work again. So we had a very ambitious time frame. as I mentioned, I learned about Project 2025 at the end of 2023. And I'm a member of a circle called the Evolutionary Leaders. And these are futurists and thought leaders, a lot of academics, but mainly futurists. And we pulled all the women together and formed, at the time we were calling it the Feminine Force Collaboratory. And in very short order, we came upon this idea of the Founding Mothers movement. So then we started the Founding Mothers Commission, and that was a year ago roughly. And we started studying, the best of systems theory. We had a lot of systems scientists in the group. And I'm sure everyone here has heard the term holism. If you're not totally familiar with this new way of looking at the world, rather than dissecting it and separating it and using the scientific method to study pieces and parts, what scientists of all genres are now realizing is that obviously it's an interconnected system, and that the sum is greater than the pieces and parts, or the impact is. And organisms are all based on holism, and movements are too. We also have a lot of people in the group who are experts in spiral dynamics. If you don't know what that is, that's basically, think Maslow's hierarchy of needs on steroids. And so it's a model that displays the spectrum of consciousness and explains basically why people believe what they believe, what motivates them, and why they hold the worldview they have. So it was another thing we were studying. We also were looking at why the 20th century movements were pretty darn successful, and why almost all of the 21st century movements have failed. Not only do they fail miserably. It would have been better had they not even attempted to implement progressive change, because they don't have a plan. There's no strategy. There are no demands frequently. And when they do fail, they leave a power vacuum, and the bad guys grab even more power. Occupy is a really good example of just this incredibly energetic movement that did span the globe, but they couldn't even appoint leaders. This whole notion of leaderless movements is a big problem. And that's a green meme issue, if you know spiral dynamics. So basically what we did was realize that the vertical axis, the centralized vertical axis, has been missing in movements. And as I put here in the slide, all organisms need a brain, and movements are no different. So we started pulling together women from around the world, strategists, analysts, all sorts of very, very accomplished women, to design the architecture, because we wanted to reignite the Women's Congress. And we also recognized that the very critical importance of a decentralized horizontal axis as well. And that's what most movements focus on, and rightly so. But I think I had a line in here: Gandhi and Martin Luther King would be horrified at how movements have been structured over the past few decades. So then we launched the Founding Mothers movement. We did that the day after Independence Day in the US. We also liked that day because it's a full moon. And we launched with a very powerful video, which I'm going to ask Tim to play now. I'm going to pause and let him play our launch video from last July. Are you there, Tim? There we go. Thank you for doing this. We don't have audio at the moment.
Patriarchy and privilege. We will no longer tolerate family violence, sexual assault, child marriage, girls who can't go to school or let their hair down, men depriving us of reproductive freedom, or sacrilege against Mother Earth. The military-industrial complex trains men to kill on command. They're also weaponizing AI. Soldiers rape women as a staple of war, and surviving women and children are left homeless. The founding fathers of every nation have brought us to where we are. Now, The Founding Mothers are joining together to lead us into an era of partnership and peace, a future that works for everyone. We're a global coalition, uniting women's groups, peace organizations, spiritual communities, and environmental groups. We're taking action to shed archaic belief systems, transform barbaric behaviors, eradicate misogyny and racism, and protect democracy. Instead of a war room, we're building a peace room. And we're spreading truth, love, and light. We serve as diplomats and peace negotiators, business leaders, elected officials, caregivers, and wisdom keepers. And we've got a concrete plan to grow this into the mother of all movements. First, we wish to honor the Mother's Day Proclamation written by Julia Ward Howe. Mother's Day was not created for gift cards and chocolates. It was a call to action for an international Congress of women to pursue the great and general interest of peace. Second, we're reimagining the Women's Congress. It will network thousands of women's groups around the world. Third, in addition to unifying our sisters around the world, we're inviting our brothers to join us. Stakeholders who lead peace, spiritual, and environmental groups. Just imagine our united strength when we, the people, organize. We'll move mountains if we focus on two specific goals: partnership and peace. Please join the Founding Mothers movement today. If you lead a women's organization, register for our online Women's Congress and help compose the Founding Mothers Manifesto. If you lead a peace, spiritual, or environmental group, enroll your organization in the coalition and help transition humanity from patriarchy to partnership. And if you're an individual who understands that our future is at stake, sign up for our mailing list, donate, volunteer your skill set, and be ready for a series of escalating campaigns starting on January the 1st, 2025. Join the Founding Mothers movement and help transform the world.
Okay, go ahead. You're back on.
Okay, thank you for showing that. All right, so we launched, as I said, in July of last year, and we immediately convened an inaugural Women's Congress, and we've been meeting ever since then. Our date is the first Saturday of the month, and we, oh, is it, hold on a second. Are you seeing it? Hold on.
No, you're
Oh, okay, sorry. There we go. So let me tell you about the Women's Congress. This image over here may look a little kooky, but it is based on sociocracy, which is a governance methodology that came out of Europe. It's also based on women's circle principles and some indigenous wisdom. So let me tell you a little bit how we structure the Congress. It operates very differently than most parliaments. First, at the center, our executive team is called the Peace Room. And that's in honor of Barbara Marx Hubbard, who said we need a peace room as sophisticated as a war room. These animal totems were overlaid for fun, but each one of the women in the peace room were actually representing a sector of society. And we put Lady Liberty at the center because it's justice and governance that's mostly at stake right now. These blue circles are our operational circles, and they fulfill very important functions for growing the movement. So the partner circle, those are partners who act as our ambassadors to help build the movement. The proclamation circle actually has already finished the Founding Mothers Proclamation. So those are our demands, which are very concrete and very clear. The campaign circle is the most active at the moment because, yes, starting on January 1st, we launched our campaigns. We also have a media circle and a tech circle. Then this green rim is depicting breaking the world up into 10 regions. So like North America, South America, Europe, Africa. And we're building this piece of this you can think of this as a layered cake almost, back to having both a horizontal and a vertical axis. So the geographic regions are becoming more important now as we look at how the campaigns are faring around the world, and also dealing with the fact that what's safe to do in the United States isn't safe to do in the Middle East. And then the outer rim are the women's circles. So each one of these little pink dots represents a delegate who's coming in representing either a women's group or a peace, a spiritual, or environmental group. And they're the ones who actually attend the Congress and vote, except we don't vote. We do the opposite of voting. We built this for speed. And so instead of saying all those in favor, raise your hand, we say the opposite. Are there any objections? And silence is golden in our Congress. If there's silence, things pass. And we borrowed that from Sociocracy. A typical schedule for the Women's Congress, they usually last about 2 hours. Some of them have gone as long as 3 hours. So we do start with debriefs from the operational circles. We usually have a keynote speaker. We've had some incredible keynote speakers already, including Marianne Williamson. Then there's time for congressional proposals. We usually do a breakout or a brainstorming session, and we're kicking ass. We're getting a lot of work done. So in just the last 9 months, I highlighted some of the proposals that have passed, because we don't want to take major organic moves without the Congress's blessing. So the first thing we did was, at the first Congress, adopt our unique governance structure. We appointed peace room members. One of the women who's part of an environmental group put a proposal forward, the protection of the mothers of all species, and that dealt with the fact that farming operations have gotten exceedingly cruel and brutal, and acknowledging that we're not the only species suffering on planet Earth. We, by the third Congress, got our Founding Mothers Proclamation done. We're very proud of this document. 7 international attorneys worked on it, including the former head of the United Nations Legal Department, who happens to have been a woman. She no longer works at the UN, but she was very helpful. We've also passed a covenant of care, conflict resolution process, just to make sure that we're ready to rock and roll. And we did all of that before the new year. And then, yes, as soon as January 1st came around, we launched the weekly worldwide wake up. So for those of you who remember the movie Network, and the guy going to the window and screaming, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore," and he got everybody else to do it. That's sort of the basis for this. So, I had a slide on it. Where did it go? It's out of order. Here, let me show you this slide. So it's also a play on John Lewis's Good Noise. So the weekly worldwide wake up was the first campaign, and it's about, we're doing it every Wednesday at noon, and it'd be great if people started doing it in Chicago. And then we did a global women's strike last Saturday, and that was in support of our proclamation, and we have a petition also that's at aves.org that we'd love for you to sign. Let me get back to the slides I missed. So this is a schedule. It's right on the website, and we did it. This is just a part of it that I put in this slide. The average nonviolent campaign that's successful lasts 3 to 4 years. The average war lasts 8 or 9. It doesn't make sense. Spontaneous movements, again, I'm going to beat this horse to death, because spontaneous movements accomplish nothing and often leave a power vacuum. So we spent about a year planning this. We've launched, and we used a 2-year time horizon in terms of brainstorming the campaigns we want to do and building momentum. So our demands are in the Founding Mothers Proclamation, which we issued on October 2nd. That's International Nonviolence Day. And there is a beautiful preamble that we call the Declaration of Planetary Partnership and Peace. Then there's a section called the World Constitution for Women, and those are the solutions that we see for empowering women across the planet. And then the World Peace Plan, which was the most difficult part to draft because the world is lawless. We don't have a world court with mandatory jurisdiction. So nations can decide to ignore the International Court of Justice. They can evade the International Criminal Court. And so we had to discuss the fact that this is the bigger challenge, believe it. Well, they're both Herculean at the moment, but this is the bigger challenge. So we dropped a lot of footnotes to the best document on the planet that sort of encompasses everything that's needed for the shift of this magnitude, and that's called the Constitution for the Federation of Earth, which was issued in 1991. I actually did a presentation for them this morning. So I've been involved with the Earth Federation movement for about 20 years now, and it has a long and storied history that also came out of the same height of the peace movement of the 1930s and 1940s. So this is our upcoming campaign, and I just wanted to show this slide because our goal is to not walk down the streets carrying posters. The bad guys don't give a damn if we do that. They also don't give a damn if we meet virtually, but they do care if we can build a true movement with the power to shift the paradigm. So we are brainstorming very novel ideas. This book, The Red Tent, came out in, I think it was 1998, and it's about the shift from polytheism to patriarchy. The woman took it's just like 2 verses in the Bible, in the Old Testament, about Dinah, who is one of Joseph's sisters. And I mean, she's mentioned in the Bible in like this one sentence, and this lady wrote a whole story, fictional story about what was happening. This in the Bible, they're talking in the Old Testament, the brothers get into a fight with another tribe that's nearby, and there's all this horrendous warfare. And anyway, Joseph ends up getting sold by his brothers into slavery, and he's the one who helps the Pharaoh, blah, blah, blah. But the reason this book is so precious is because every woman on the planet menstruates. We may not be mothers, but we all get our period. And this was a time in all cultures, not just in the Middle East, where the men thought they were banishing us for a week. What we were really doing was having a party. So in the Red Tent, the women were still worshiping the goddesses that they were no longer permitted to worship when they came out of the tent, because Yahweh was a god now. And so it's very symbolic of losing the divine feminine. We're tying it in with Mother's Day, which is Sunday, and it's going to be a week-long strike. So Monday also happens to be a full moon. How perfect. So our idea here is that the strike will build during the weeks. You start with the mothers, add the daughters, the grandmothers, the granddaughters, that by Friday there'd be a full sisterhood strike, all women at full force. We would invite the men to join us, help us set up these tents. And then on Sunday, a day of peace, a day of celebration. So those are the sorts of very poignant and meaningful campaigns that the Founding Mothers are brainstorming. Here's another upcoming campaign. On October 2nd, which again is International Day of Nonviolence, that will be the 1-year anniversary of our passing the Founding Mothers Proclamation. And we're going to march. The SALT March took about 24 days. We think we can get to the War Pentagon from the Peace Pentagon in between 25 or 30 days, depending how many miles we trek a day. And we thought we'd stop along the route and give a tip of the hat to the Virginia Founding Fathers. We'd be passing Monticello in Charlottesville. We'll be going to James Madison's house, Montpelier. We'll go by GW's house in Mount Vernon. And there's also a Trump winery along the route. So we think it's going to be a pretty fun outing. And we're thinking about adding horseback riders and all sorts of exciting things. If this is successful, even if it's Forrest Gump-esque, even if people, join while you're walking through their town, or pick up later as we get closer and closer to the central cosmopolitan region of Northern Virginia, we can shut down the whole East Coast seaboard. And that is our goal, because we're not kidding. We also have a lot of lawyers involved, as I mentioned, and we want to use the courts. I've got the Kellogg Briand Pact listed as a possible lawsuit because almost every country signed it. And so I've been envisioning this amazing lawsuit where all the plaintiffs are all the peace groups and anti-war groups and women's, whatever, thousands and thousands of plaintiffs, right? And the defendants are every country that's at war, whether directly or via proxy. So I think that would be a very interesting lawsuit for The Hague. We're also thinking about a First Amendment lawsuit for religious freedom in the US because Roe was decided under the 14th Amendment, a right to privacy. But many religious groups are worshiping the divine feminine now. They are modeling partnerism in terms of their view of deity. And it is actually against some people's religion to tell a woman what to do with her body, including the Jewish faith. The Jewish women are all over this, and rabbis are filing lawsuits around the country. They're making their way through the courts. And this was just we have a church here called Oracle Temple, and the Federalist Society brought an anti-abortion statute here. I mentioned before we started that I live in a very rural town at the tip of the Bible Belt. So I'm on the Virginia side of the New River, but this is definitely MAGA country. So the alt-right thought it might be fun to bring some of their bullshit east of the Mississippi. And they chose my little town, Independence, Virginia. And we had to beat them back, and we did. All right, our theories of change. How am I doing on time? I'm gonna run, pardon?
You got plenty of time, so go ahead and keep talking.
Okay, so like any good, social movement builder, we have to have our theories of change. So the first one is the catalyst. Women are pissed. And reproductive freedom has ignited us. And I got a little history here. Back in the day when I was a little girl, even Republicans believed in reproductive freedom. And it was a strategic decision for Nixon to reverse course on this. And this is when we get the infamous Phyllis Schlafly, who described the women's liberation movement as a total assault on the role of American women. Then again, in 1973, we get Roe v. Wade. So everything was trending toward greater freedoms and liberty for women until the alt-right appeared. So I got Rush Limbaugh in here. He was instrumental. He started using the term feminazis. I mean, just the ugliness of the culture war in general is noteworthy. And that's why Donald Trump turned to the evangelicals for assistance. I mean, my God, this is the guy who held the Bible upside down as he eviscerated our constitutional rights to demonstrate. And we haven't seen nothing yet. And now we've got Amy Coney Barrett, who literally was a handmaid. She attends a church. They've changed it now because she's gotten so noteworthy and because of being on the Supreme Court. But her church was called the People of Praise, and the young women were called handmaids, and they were trained to basically follow the dominionism theory of the very, how do I want to put it? Just the evangelical wing of the party that truly believes that Jesus is due back any day. No, don't need to take care of the planet because we're all heading for Armageddon anyway, and so on and so forth. So these very dangerous religious beliefs. And then of course, 2022, the Dobbs decision. So it has catalyzed women, and we're finally seeing the results of strategic planning and the activism that's going to result. So the other theory of change has to do with the current wave of feminism. And this is a broad brush, but the first wave focused on voting rights. The second wave focused on more civil rights. The third wave, which I date like 1970 to 2000, focused more on family rights. And then this fourth wave is what partially ignited the culture war. The focus has been on LGBTQ rights, and the alt-right just couldn't handle that. That was a little too much for them. So we're seeing the backlash to what they call wokeism, and some of that is understandable. I don't want to go into that topic tonight, but I share some of the woke grievances with wokeism. But here we are at the fifth wave. And so we want to ensure that this era gets defined as being about gender equity. I mean, just very, very simple. It's time. Women have waited long enough. This planet has been dominated by masculine energy for long enough. We need to be partners. So I mentioned spiral dynamics earlier. This is probably the theory of change that lends itself best to believe this is possible, that it's possible to finally unite the planet. Not only do we have the technology now to do it, but we've got a lot of humans here at stage 6 on the spectrum of consciousness. So I turned the model into a pyramid. Most people are used to seeing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but this model goes way beyond those sorts of analyses because it also includes worldviews, God views, how we see each other. And basically we move from, an egocentric stage when we're kids, most of us grow out of this pretty darn quickly, to an ethnocentric, sort of a nationalist mentality. And fundamentalism here doesn't just mean in the religious context, it means in the business context, it can mean, the military itself is built on this sort of nationalist pride and also taking orders. This is where most Americans are, stage 5. It's an individualistic meme. The religious views are fairly orthodox or non-existent. And then here's the world-centric meme. The very first time people really go pluralistic in the sense of caring about that child overseas who's starving. It's not the tipping point. The tipping point is up here in this model when one becomes fully integrated and is able to see all the pieces in the system and understand that it's a quilt and understand that it's almost like going to school. You get a high school and you go to college or whatever. You graduate and you don't lose these earlier stages of your development. They're still in your toolbox, so to speak. And we just feel that finally that there is a level of consciousness that would make it possible to unite the planet around progressive values. Now, Gandhi in his autobiography talked about his Himalayan miscalculation. And I have this in the slide because he overestimated his followers' level of consciousness. When the Brits left, all hell broke loose. And as we know, the country split into two. And the massacre of Calcutta haunted Gandhi till his death. So he didn't have the language of spiral dynamics, but what he was describing is taking a stage 4 nation and trying to get them to stay at this level of pluralism, and it was too much. They couldn't do it. They fell back into ethnocentrism. So it's something to keep in mind. And I've got a quote here from Ken Wilber. He's known as the Einstein of consciousness. Right now, humanity is in a desperate race between the 70% that remain at ethnocentric or lower levels and the 30% or so at world-centric and higher levels. I seriously give that race a 50-50 chance of coming out in our favor. Yeah. So here's another theory of change, integral theory itself. So the first quadrant is you, how you operate internally, how you react to the world. So it's your emotions, your intelligence level, your perceptions, your worldview. The second quadrant is me observing you. How would I describe your behavior? How would I describe your mental health? Are you addicted to something? How are your communication skills? What have you achieved? So this is sort of the observer it. And this is where it gets interesting. So here's the we quadrant. So the third quadrant are our shared values. How we give meaning and ethics to events that occur. This is where our cultural norms come in, our customs, and it's all about our relationships. And then the fourth quadrant is the systems level we. So it's the institutions, it's our government, it's our societal structure, and it's how our institutions process the world. In integral theory, when you overlay social systems theory, this is the quadrant of interest. So they're destroying Trump. I mean, it's obvious that's the goal. They're going to destroy the US government and replace it with a culture that they're trying to have emerge here, namely white nationalism. So the fight now is moving to the third quadrant, and that's the quadrant for movements. And we have just got to ensure that the values that we share are the values that predominate and carry the day. Another theory of change is the shift in Godhead itself. I have a line I use in my last book: when the Godhead shifts, so does the paradigm. And to prove the point, I see the world, and many do too, many others do too, many historians. This is not original to me, but if we think of the first paradigm as the quintessential all is one, the primordial all is one, then Big Bang. So the second paradigm is the first time we, our ancestors, created a belief system, and it's centered around the Great Mother. Very different than goddesses, but the Great Mother was the sole deity. So she was both loved and feared, and that was the longest lived paradigm. Then we get into the third spiritual paradigm, and this is when the pantheons were created. It also is heavily correlated to the age of agriculture. This is when male and female roles start deviating. We're no longer hunter-gatherers. We're now all sorts of things. This is when the caste system develops. We need warriors to protect excess goods, and all sorts of fun stuff starts during this third paradigm. Now, it's interesting that Hinduism is the only religion that survived the next shift. Buddhism, actually, you can think of it as a religion or not. It's more a theory on self-evolution, but there are reasons why Hinduism survived its pantheon. But let's talk about what happened 2,000 years ago. So God went male. So we've gone from female monotheism to polytheism to male monotheism. The Abrahamic religions ushered this in, and with it, a heightened focus on the masculine energies of ourselves, the world, however you want to think of it. So we started prizing invention over compassion. We started, prizing short-term game over, web thinking and the safety and security of everyone. I mean, it's just gone sideways because the Godhead's been out of balance. So here at the Oracle Institute, we say we're entering the fifth spiritual paradigm. That's another reason why I'm building the Pentagon. It's all about 5. And this little graphic here shows what's happening right now. So the evolutionary impulse is toward greater and greater states of consciousness. But what's happened is in the first tier, let me go back to this. The first tier has been spiraling in the wrong direction. So the old school nationalist is becoming a neo-nationalist. People who were pretty comfortable, middle America financially, are now becoming, get immigrants out of here. Everybody's like taking a step back. Not everybody, but many are. And that's how Trump was able to tap into all those grievances. So I call this the God gap. So there's also an arrow going this way, unfortunately. And this is, I think, the definition of a paradigm shift is when when the polarity is this extreme, there's no common ground left. But our goal is to do meta unity. All right. So one of my other famous or favorite quotes is, how can women be equal on the earth plane if God is a man in the ethereal plane? Okay, here's another theory of change. This has to do with polarity, studying it and trying to wrap your mind around it. So I've got here first a very famous quote from The Fourth Turning. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. And they came up with a new one. The Fourth Turning is here. So here, they wrote this in 97. They called it To the Year. You should try to unlearn the linear belief that America is exempt from the seasonal cycles of nature. Try to unlearn the linear need to judge change by one-dimensional standards of progress. Finally, unlearn the linear view that positive change always comes willingly, incrementally, and by human design. Sometime before the year 2025, America will pass through a gate in history commensurate with the American Revolution, Civil War, and twin emergencies of the Great Depression and World War II. And here we are. I could do a whole talk on this cycle and season theory that Strauss and Howe write about. I believe it's absolutely true. It's an 80 to 100 year pattern. It has to do with 4 generations. It has to do with basically the famous saying, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. So we are in the crisis stage right now. And the other thing is, we all synced up. They saw this pattern, you know, in Persia and China, and before we were isolated, right? But we all synced up our calendars with the world wars. So now everybody's going to go through this shift at the same time. So normally the goal with diplomacy is polarity management, and it's trying to get, you know, this pendulum to calm down, come back to center, reach consensus, and not everybody's going to be happy, but the bulk of people agree with the values being anchored. In a situation like we have right now, the pendulum is swinging so far left to right, it's actually going to flip. It's going to go whoop. It's like a swing. If you swing too fast on your swing, you might go whoop. And that's what I think is about to happen. And we're dealing with nihilists. We're dealing with people who actually want to destroy the system. So we're seeing that play out every day. I'm sure all of you are following the news, and they literally have federal office buildings up for sale now. So we got to do a SWOT analysis if you're doing a movement. I'm not going to read through all of these, but a SWOT analysis is about your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And again, we got a lot of geeks involved with Founding Mothers, as well as a lot of hardcore activists. And we had fun making these lists and determining, is it really possible? Is it really possible to do global movement? So here's some potential timelines that are in play. So I call this the fascist timeline. I should probably call this the oligarch timeline now. I did this slide deck when we first launched. So we all know about the gerrymandering and the oppression of voting rights. You know, things are just out of control. The mass shootings, all of it, the fear of immigrants, white nationalism, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we got this fascist timeline in play. Then we got the attacks on women. We got the Handmaid's Tale timeline in play. I mean, literally, you know, I learned a new term a week or so ago, and it's called the trad wife movement, a traditional wife. So we've got, I think that's the level to which they have designed Project 2025, because tens of thousands of women are involved now. And after the Oscars, they had a very consolidated, coordinated letter writing campaign because some of the outfits were a little too revealing, a little too much cleavage. Then we got the anti-woke timeline going. We got all these attacks on gender rights, gender fluidity. Ay, ay, ay. But here's a timeline that I think, I'm hoping everyone in the audience here wants, and that's a new timeline. That's a new story. And we do think the consciousness level of the planet is sufficient to support it now, that most people would want this, and that mainly we got to get organized and make sure that these institutions get built with the value set that we care about. Okay, let's see. We also do a lot of generational messaging at Founding Mothers. I want to point out that Founding Mothers is not another nonprofit. That is the last thing we need. It is a meta-unity brand. And we did that for a variety of reasons. We want this to be a multi-headed hydra, right? So that if they try to take, you know, little Laura George out of the Oracle Institute, there's plenty of other nonprofits that are part of Founding Mothers movement that are going to continue getting the ball down the field. So we're just very aware of, in addition to spiral dynamics, all of the different generational sensitivities and proclivities and yearnings. So we're paying a lot of attention to marketing. And we're paying attention to what the masters did. So Gandhi always had an ashram, always focused on community care. And we also believe that we're going to need that for the long run. So we're building hubs, and if someone listening has a place where people can go, if they need to either continue planning in your region or need a break from, I think, what's coming, which is going to be pretty ugly. We're looking for physical spaces where people can rejuvenate and plan. And then I always have to throw in this slide about, do you know Virginia has 2 Pentagons? So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'm just looking at the time. So I left everybody speechless. What's going on? No, it was good, but come on.
Covered a lot very quickly.
I know.
At the restaurant because there was some ambient noise. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Dr. George, for your presentation. We are now going to open it up to questions. I shall ask the first question. If a country invades another country and the country being invaded participates in war in a defensive way, would your organization have an issue with that?
So we definitely have some people, and by the way, there's a lot of men involved too. We definitely have some people involved who are no NATO under any circumstances. I am not one of those people. I am not naive enough to think that we can talk Putin out of his crazy or that we can talk Trump out of his crazy. I did a chapter in my last book called Gandhi versus Hitler, comparing the two. They were contemporaries. And even Gandhi realized, well, he participated in World War II. So I do not couple peace building with stupidity when it comes to fascist oligarchs and people who would never extend us the courtesies we would extend them. I do, however, believe in dealing fairly with opponents. And Gandhi is a good example. Martin Luther King is as well. You always knew where they stood. Their demands weren't moving targets. So yes, when it comes to NATO right now, I think they should, the European Union needs to let Ukraine in immediately because they're about to lose a big chunk of territory to a model of governance that most humans would not want to live under. And I'm also believe in freedom fighting.
All right. So who's got the next question?
All right, Joseph, you go online. Go ahead. Joe, you're online. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So first, quick question. Are you aware of Gandhi's letters to him?
Gandhi's what?
Gandhi wrote a letter or maybe even more than one. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not my whole question. Thanks for answering that. So you didn't touch a lot on the topic of sexual assault. I was wondering in general, what your organization or affiliated organizations are looking into doing to stop or reduce sexual assault, and specifically, do you support repealing statutes of limitations on reporting sexual crimes?
So, well, that is another big area of concern because it's mostly women involved. The Founding Mothers Proclamation has I'm going to switch words now from demands to solutions, and domestic violence, and which is the most common violence against women, by the way, and sexual assault are definitely dealt with in the proclamation. The issue has to do, and yes, I'm in favor of extending statutes of limitations, absolutely. The issue, though, is that I mentioned this earlier, we live in a world where there's no judicial system that has mandatory jurisdiction and no enforcement. So even if the International Court of Justice were to, if every country submitted and went through the process of going to the court, if they lose, right now they can thumb their nose, and even after submitting to mandatory jurisdiction, they could thumb their nose, and then what? Where's the enforcement mechanism? So it's very complicated. Again, the people who have thought this through, I think in the wisest manner and most thorough manner, are the Earth Federalists who are backing the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. There's an article in that Constitution on the world judiciary and an article on enforcement powers, what a world police force would look like. And many people get, just hair on fire scared when they contemplate that, because it sounds a lot like one world order, right? But I like to say this is Team Light's version of globalization. We already know what Team Dark's version looks like. So Team Light's version has beyond checks and balances, like the executive, for instance, has no ability to do anything other than implement the laws that the parliament legislates. And they also added this other body called the House of Counselors, which is sort of a tip of the hat to indigenous wisdom, eldership. And that is a body that is comprised of scholars, academics around the world. So the drafters of this document really studied history, really contemplated what we're going to need for the transition into this new world, and designed a pretty elegant document. So it's gaining media attention again. It came out in 1991, and people hear Earth Constitution, they think Earth Charter, which is really, it's a beautiful document, but it's not a constitution. It's a set of pretty principles, and there's lots of those out there. But this is a real constitution for the Earth, and we see these experiments happening locally with the People's Assemblies movement. Virtual nation movement is growing. So we're seeing these sorts of democratic experiments taking place. And at some point we need to do it at the world level, right? Like Spock, right? There's going to be an Earth Federation at some point.
All right, next question. Let's go with Jan, and then we'll do George.
Okay, you want to hand the mic over to Jan? Go ahead.
I'm not intending this as a rebuttal, but I would like to question the idea that sexual assault has involved mostly women. I think if you count little girls as women, then you're probably right. But can you explain something I have really become very conscious of lately, I would say in the last 5 years, that organizations where men are directing young boys, like the Boy Scouts, and my background is in Mormonism, and these there are so many examples of boys being assaulted and sexually abused. I don't think that when you say it's all women that.
So what's your question?
Yeah.
My question, can you let me ask my question? Do you mind, Justin?
It doesn't take you, you're ranting.
I'm not ranting.
She's prefacing her question. It's a preface.
Is absolutely prefacing her question, and boy, am I into this question. Keep going.
I really do think that's questionable, that it is mostly women. Okay.
All right.
So it's mostly women who are sexually assaulted, but you are absolutely correct that we've got rampant pedophilia, and starting with my still my birth religion, but my former religion, Catholicism, right? I mean, it's rampant, and and it's underreported. That's why some of the stats on the attacks on young males the research isn't as, well documented. But I agree with you. I was reading the stat this morning for this other presentation. Half of the children on the planet will be sexually abused or seriously physically abused. I could go back to the other presentation, and that's a 2021 report from a global group that's monitoring abuse against children. It's just incredible. It's truly mind-numbing how many children are attacked. I mean, we're a violent species. I mean, it's these sorts of questions that make me doubt that we've got the consciousness, the collective consciousness to do this. There's a lot of darkness in the world. no doubt.
All right, let's do George.
Well, you talk about toxic masculinity, but don't you think men are devalued, ignored, and impugned? They are persecuted in this culture, especially white males, the way I look at it.
Is that a question?
Yeah, I'm asking.
It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I actually did not use that term. I did not say toxic masculinity once tonight.
About masculinity, negative
But we can
terms.
talk about the attacks on men for sure, but I did not use that term tonight. So you're correct. And the results are suicide rates are going up with young men. I have a son who is 33 years old, and he tells me how he's feeling. And this is a very dangerous and explosive moment because both the young women are pissed off. You know, there are all these like Lysistrata based anti-sex movements going on around the globe, and the young men are, you know, frustrated. And we need to attempt to, again, with that very first quote I read, decouple human traits from what body people are in, right? I mean, some of the most gentle, compassionate people I know are male, and as you can tell, I'm a pretty assertive female. So we need to uncouple these traits, and we need to prize both masculine and feminine traits that are deeply, you know, need to be cherished and encouraged. I mean, courage we typically think of as a male trait, but I know many courageous women too, right? So I think we're moving into an era when it's okay to be who you are, hopefully. That is going to become normal. And we'll see that the tension between particularly young men and young women decrease. I'll just add that there's economic reasons for this as well, as women are getting more economically independent, and less economically dependent, as in, you know, 1950s housewives. That's a frustration point culturally, because there are patterns where men, as the breadwinners, were expecting a certain level of attention, use a nice word. So women are way more empowered now, and want to follow their passion, want to follow their purpose just as much as men do. And I think it's all going to even out, but I do agree with you, Tim, that, no, it's not Tim, you're in Tim's camera, but I do agree with you that this woke bullshit is causing all kinds of issues for both the left and the right.
Okay.
All right.
Mike.
Better have a good question.
All right, Mike.
You better
All
ask
right.
one.
Yeah, ask one.
All
Mike.
right, I'm with George in his corner. The Manhattan's got to stop. Those alpha white males are getting beat up too much. We're not that bad.
Well, what's your question, Doofus?
See? Hey, see?
No
It's from another white alpha white male.
Okay,
Yeah, like, man, all this negativity. I'm blaming it on too much internet for you, buddy. Too much.
Not the man on man violence.
I'll point out that I haven't picked on white men either. I've talked about white nationalism, and there's a lot of women involved, like the trad wives.
Well, there's just a lot of straight, alpha white male, straight white male hating going on. But I blame it on the internets and the girls that have shit in their ears all day long. Anyway, here's my question to you. Why are you not, this is a dumb country. Why are you not just, listen, MAGA sells. Everybody loves that. Gulf of America sells. These slogans, why don't you, and I think Russ is in agreement, back the Defense Department to the original name War Department. Since trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars are spent around the world on wars, make a movement, something simple. Americans are dumb, stupid, half of them. And just go, we want the original name back to the Defense Department.
Is that your question?
Because why don't you change it
How
back?
about the peace department? How about the peace department? Instead of focusing on war, we focus on peace. And sometimes we have to go to war. Sometimes we have to use the tools in our toolbox when a bad guy enters the scene.
There's no profit in peace, but if you name it the War Department, people will go, oh, we're spending all our money on war.
Okay, that would be the wrong direction. By the way, my father was director of the Arms Control Agency under Ronald Reagan, and we don't have an arms control agency anymore. But if we want to have a thrivable, prosperous, humane future for our children and future generations, we better get right. We better have learned some lessons from history. And most of our heroes were people who made this a better planet by bringing peace, by bringing prosperity, by bringing pluralism, understanding, trust amongst neighbors. Trump has fueled our worst, most primal instincts. He fuels fear and he fuels rage. And those are not the leaders I admire at all.
All right, thank you. We will go to Ellen and then Charlie.
It's all right, it's all right.
Okay, I have a two-parter. The first one is, are you familiar with the idea that the Ukrainian war is a proxy war between the US and Russia? And second of all, are you familiar with people such as the economist, I believe his name is Jeffrey Sachs, who posits that one of the things that led to the Ukrainian war is that at one point we promised Russia, well, back then it was the Soviet Union, that we would not have NATO move 1 inch eastward, and since then at least 10 countries east of, we've moved at least 10 countries east from when we said we were gonna stop.
So that's your question.
So yes, I know the history of the Ukraine war. Back to my father for a second. He wrote his PhD dissertation. The title was Spheres of Influence. And he wrote this in the 1970s. And he argued that we should let Russia, well, back then it was the Soviet Union, have satellite countries. Well, how would you like to be born in one of Russia's satellite countries? I do not agree with my father. I do not agree that even if we did make some stupid promise a decade ago that, sure, Putin, consider Ukraine a satellite, a buffer zone. Who the heck are we to say that the Ukrainian people can't be free? Okay, I am always in favor of freedom and always in favor of freedom fighters. And I don't care who made what promises to Putin over a decade ago. It doesn't matter. The Ukrainian people want their freedom and they deserve their freedom. And the reason more countries have joined NATO is because Putin invaded a neighbor. So I could go on and on about this. And yeah, I do know all that. And you had another part of your question in the beginning. What did you say before Ukraine? And Jeffrey Sachs.
Proxy war for the.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely a proxy war. Well, I mean, it's primarily about a nation fighting for its sovereignty and its ability to govern itself. But yeah, it's a proxy war in the sense that we've been sending them heavy military assistance and money, and so has Europe. So in that sense, it is a proxy war. And we can look at this almost as World War III having started. I mean, this whole term proxy war just means, you know, we don't have boots on the ground necessarily. But yeah, I mean, Ukrainians would have had a hard time defending themselves if Europe and the US hadn't rushed in.
All right, so thank you. We'll go with Charlie, and if nobody else has a question, I'll ask after Charlie.
Okay, Charlie.
Okay, Dr. George, according to your forecasters, that there would be a paradigm shift, I heard several times. However, not only once, but twice, the United States did not elect a woman president. Not only did they not elect a woman president, your sisters didn't show up. What explanation could you give for that? And not only did they not get elected, but the guy who got elected is obliterating all gender type equality measures that have ever been. What is your candid view of this?
Well, had I been totally honest when I did the white paper for Founding Mothers Movement, I would have, well, I think it's in the SWOT analysis. No, you're absolutely right. My sisters voted for Trump, right? White suburban women voted for Trump. It's terrifying to me that after hard won victories by the first, second, third wave feminists, a lot of women just sort of got lazy and didn't take the right seriously as they came for them over the years. But what's more distressing are the women who seem to have no interest in either maintaining the rights that we've achieved or expanding on them. My only answer for that is back to spiral dynamics. I mean, there are multiple levels of consciousness on the planet. I have a line in my book. We got everything from barbarians to Buddhas walking the planet. The Einstein of consciousness, Ken Wilber, he's exaggerating, but he's saying if he wrote in one book, if Buddha were alive today, he'd be a dime a dozen. And what he means by that is that there are many humans who have achieved a consciousness level that we would have ascribed in the olden days to a prophet, an avatar, a very, very, very wise person. And as you ascend the spectrum of consciousness, you reach those levels of comprehension. You reach those levels of compassion. You start to really integrate what unconditional love means. And, you know, I'm surrounded by a lot of new agers who talk about how this whole focus needs to be love. And I remind them constantly, every meme loves. Wilbur, in one of he loves pissing people off. He wrote in one of his books that even Nazis love, right? So the issue is, how big is your circle of love? If you're very ethnocentric, it's only your tribe. If you're nationalistic, you know, the next level up, it's your country. It's your, you know, grander culture. And when you go pluralistic for the first time, you start not only like tolerating the other, you actually find it fascinating, you know, how they eat, the food they serve, how they do ceremony, how they do ritual. And I was like that as a kid. I mean, my best friend when I was little was Jewish. I loved going to temple with her. My best friend in middle school was Muslim. I loved going to her house for dinner. When you reach a level where you love the diversity, that's when you can start envisioning unity in diversity. That phrase for most humans may still just fall on deaf ears, like, what? Unity and diversity? But when you reach that worldview and you see that the world is a tapestry of just amazing colors and smells and people and patterns, you reach just a level of intense gratitude, and you want to preserve all of it because it's all beautiful. Well, actually, not all of it. We've got a lot of people hiding behind ancient religions doing a lot of bad things, but I think you get my point. And so back to my sisters who don't get it, they just don't get it. They just don't get it yet. And they're fear-based, and they probably are financially dependent, and on and on and on and on and on.
All right, thanks. All right, I'll ask a second question. If crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight?
Fascists, oligarchs, people like Putin who invade, monsters. A freedom fighter is someone who's fighting for their freedom because there are no other options to obtain your freedom. I am not suggesting that violence is the answer. It usually is not the answer, but I carve out a teeny exception for those who are facing someone who's a megalomaniac, someone who's a sociopath. There's no reasoning with these people. Back to Gandhi writing Hitler. Yes, I know about that. The letters are really rather amusing. He thought he could maybe talk Hitler into his higher self and help him ascend. I mean, give me a break. These people are mentally ill by today's standards. There's no reasoning with them. And in those rare instances, when they're attacking you, yeah, I do believe in self-defense and I do believe in standing ground. Because when you don't stand ground and you cave to them, we see the result of that, and we're seeing it every day in the United States.
All right, Tim.
I'd like to know your, that's all right, she can hear me.
Okay.
I'd like to know your views with Palestine and the Jewish state, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit.
Oof. I'm with the Palestinians. Netanyahu's also in the oligarch club. That's clear. I mean, you can't have this discussion without being labeled anti-Semite. And I think I just told you my best friend when I was little was Jewish. I mean, I have great admiration and respect for the Jewish culture, but this has nothing to do with protecting Israel. This has everything to do with using an event to grab territory. I mean, over the weekend, I tried to take one day off a week, and I was walking around, and I literally got a vision of all these guys with black Sharpies and maps of the world. And Trump's not kidding about Greenland. I don't think he's kidding about Canada either. You think it's funny that he renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America? I don't find that funny in the least. These people think they have the power and the right to remap in a way that is anathema to the diplomatic and humane ways we go about solving problems. So I am very much concerned about that situation. And I mean, it's a genocide. Of course, it's a genocide. And Netanyahu's using this as an excuse. And there are all these political reasons too. And he's got all these lawsuits pending and criminal cases pending. And I mean, he's a pig. He's a pig. He's in the pig pen with Putin and Trump.
All right, we'll go to Charlie and then George.
Okay, Charlie, go ahead.
Okay, Dr. George, a few years ago in the early stages of feminism, we had a speaker at the college. And I don't want to revisit Chalice and Blade, but he spoke for an hour on the accomplishments of the white European male in Western culture in every field of endeavor. The greatest scientists, Newton and so forth, composers, he was a musician, great works of music, literature and poetry and so forth. What would be your rebuttal or remark regarding that presentation if you had been there?
Well, I think it's self-evident and it is data truth that the achievements of European males, white European males, to our way of thinking today are exceptional. The problem though is back to when the Godhead shifts, the paradigm shifts, we've been in this age of only worshiping the masculine traits. And that's why we're not taking care of the planet. That's why we're not taking care of our children properly. That's why education was going downhill even before Trump tried to wipe out the Department of Education. There's nothing wrong and there's everything right with admiring geniuses and businessmen too, who, find an opportunity, whether it's guns or butter, and who add to what I call the Tower of Truth in our progress. What's wrong though is minimizing that other energetic, which again is the compassion piece and the piece that has to do with nurturing and caring about future generations. The problem with only worshiping and admiring that level of accomplishment or that type of accomplishment is that it's very short run. I'm thinking of Oppenheimer right now, who regretted building the bomb. Actually, there's a really funny book came out many years ago, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And I remember on Mars, the men walk around with tool belts and they're just building, right? Just to build for building's sake. And back to Oppenheimer, it's like the guys in the white lab coats in laboratories. They're just doing it because they're pushing the envelope. It's a personal challenge. I mean, and all of that's wonderful and great, except for the fact that it doesn't take into account the feminine energy, which again has to do with setting priorities and web thinking. And linear thinking sees a domino effect going in one direction, and it wants to get from point A to Z the fastest way possible. The right brain operates differently. The right brain thinks about all the interconnected pieces, and that what I do here is going to impact you there. And unbridled capitalism ain't going to be fun for long because people get hurt. It's all those relational needs and factors that get forgotten and get minimized when we only worship that sort of technological progress. And it's a mistake. And we need to get in balance. Back to why we're focusing on partnerism. We just have to get into balance. And I don't think the planet has ever really been in balance. Riane Eisler in her book, Chalice and Blade, talked about the one civilization they can find that there's tons of evidence and it looks validated, that this was a culture that wasn't patriarchal, it wasn't matriarchal, it was truly a partnership culture. And I can't remember the name of the island. And they could tell from the statuary. I mean, you look at the statuary and the engravings left by the Romans and the Greeks, and it's, pulling slaves with a rope and, conquering, all this domination stuff. But this culture had, beautiful art, and you see people playing instruments and doing celebratory things, intergenerationally, men and women. And it's just, what kind of a world do we want to live in? I mean, aren't we sick of patriarchy run amok? Aren't we sick of capitalism run amok? How about we try something gentler, kinder, and allow people a break from this animus that seems to be rising globally? It's dangerous, not just from a touchy-feely standpoint. It's dangerous from a survival standpoint. It's the reason we are desecrating the planet. It's the reason that we don't care that the disparity of wealth is so extreme that, I mean, there's literally people dying every day, millions of people. I mean, I don't know. I've had enough. I'm old enough now to have witnessed enough, studied enough. And I just think, how about we try something new? How about we try nice?
All right, thanks. So we'll go with George and then Jan.
You progressives have been talking about the end of the world coming within 2 years. Sometimes they say 2, sometimes 5. I don't know what. The world is a very big place. I don't think so. And Trump doesn't either. I had another question. The question about Musk cutting all this democratic waste that they've been pulling all these years with all these deep state phonies. What do you think of the Musk's waste efficiency office?
Well, let me deal with the end times question first, because I don't know any progressive who thinks it's of the world. In fact, it is the Abrahamic religions that are vibrating end times. Let us know, if we don't already know, that the Christians are waiting for Jesus to come back any day now. The Muslims are waiting for the Mahdi, and the Jews still are waiting for their Messiah. So progressives tend to not believe in those sorts of prophecies written by ancient humans about mountain gods. I also will clue you in on something in case you don't know. Does anybody here know what the year 2033 is? Speaking of end times, anybody? 2033? That will be the 2,000-year anniversary of the crucifixion, folks. Imagine how crazed they're going to be in 2033. You heard it here first. We watch this stuff at the Oracle Institute. These people are crazy, and they will identify someone as Jesus, the Messiah. You just wait and watch. So no, the progressives don't have this issue. Now, with regard to Musk, If you haven't realized already that this is a plan to not deal with waste, if they wanted to deal with waste, they wouldn't have fired the inspector generals whose job it is to find waste, and they find billions of waste and they remedy it. This is about destroying this country and rebuilding it in a Christian nationalist image. They want to turn this place into a theocracy. Musk is also in the pig pen, in my view. He's a sociopath. He has been stealing left and right as he cuts. He's getting sole source contracts from the government. He, I mean, I just go on and on. The man's, in my view, the second most dangerous man on the planet. So you will see, you will start missing the services that our government has been providing us for a long time, and services that we've come to rely on and that civilized society does rely on. You know, it's interesting that we did not, as a country, reach the green meme as a set point. If we had reached that level of pluralism and understanding and acceptance of one another and responsibility for one another, we would have had universal health care. We're the only industrialized nation without universal health care. So this whole cowboy individualism, I mean, there's so many, from a marketing standpoint, things they're plucking on their instruments that people are responding to. I don't know what you're responding to in particular, but you will see that these people are crazy and they're destroying what was the best economy in the world 2 months ago, in addition to the institutional damage.
All right, we got Jan. Has anybody else got any questions?
I think after Jan, we're gonna go into rebuttals.
All right.
Sorry, by you, Jason. Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Uh,
Thank you, sir.
I take exception to the idea that we should have voted for women for president. Those women, both of them, were subjects of the system, and voting for them for president would not have made a bit of difference. And so I'm wondering if you can defend the idea that we should have voted for women for president. It was impossible for me to vote for Hillary after what happened in Honduras. She was responsible for it. She was the Secretary of State. Anyway, I don't think that voting for women makes any difference if they are part of the system when you vote for them.
Yeah, I actually didn't say that we should have voted for women. Someone asked me a question about the election. I also did not vote for Hillary Clinton. I did vote for Kamala Harris. Neither one was my first choice, but the alternative with regard to Harris was just an abomination. So I wasn't about to throw my vote away like I did the year I voted for Jill Stein. Again, we need to decouple from these physical sheaths that we're born into and that we will drop when we die, these stereotypes, because you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that just because someone's a woman doesn't mean she's a healthy web thinker and is predominantly working from the right brain and using, you know, some of the sensitivities that we typically think of as female. It doesn't mean that at all. You know, I was trained by a military father, and I went to law school, and I only used this hemisphere of my brain for a very, 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 very long time. And it was my spiritual journey and becoming an interfaith minister that I think helped balance me out. So it's all about balance. It's not about these physical bodies. And I share your concerns about Hillary. Regarding Kamala, though, oh my God, I actually think she did win. But, I mean, when they project all this election stealing, oh my God, we don't have time for that. Anyway, yeah, it's not about the sex of the person. It's about their essence and their truthiness and their trustability and their moral fiber. And sadly, we are lacking heroes. We are lacking heroes right now.
Okay,
All right. So what time is it?
it's about 10 minutes to 8, so we should move to rebuttals.
All right. So how long shall we?
I'd say about a upward limit of 4 minutes.
All right. 4 minutes.
George will go first.
We will start our rebuttals, and George, you can have the first rebuttal.
And then we'll go to Joseph Kopsik
Well,
next.
this program is about women's rights. The Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced into Congress in 1923. The wording of the ERA, when passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification almost 50 years later, in 1972, was similar. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Thus, for more than 50 years, the key concept behind the ERA was the notion that women were individuals whose rights should be equal to those of men and who should be treated equally by public agencies. The ERA's passage, it failed. I remember that. And was blocked by a coalition of right-wing Christian fundamentalists. However, the extension of the 14th Amendment to women by the U.S. Supreme Court during the 1970s obscured the amendment's positive potential. The ERA didn't pass, but the 14th Amendment gave more rights to women. And I remember because all the women were saying, if you don't vote for it, I'm gonna not date you anymore. And I lost one. I said, hell no, I'm not voting for that.
All right, so first off, the ERA did pass. Virginia was the 38th state. So it should have been the law of the land. And Bill Barr, in one of his last acts of despotism, issued a letter to the archives, National Archives, and told them not to publish. So sadly, Merrick Garland didn't resolve it. And they waited till the last minute, which these are the moments I think they really are actors on a stage and they're messing with all of us. And it's a play we're watching because they had 4 years to take care of that. Barr did that like just a couple months before he left office. So it should be the law of the land. It should be the law of the land, number one. And I'm so tired. I can't remember what else you said. Was there?
Ma'am. So this is just to remind you, this is a rebuttal. So you don't get to reply to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. That's fine.
No, you'll get the last word.
You'll have a time. Yeah. So take notes. You'll get 5 minutes at the end when everybody's done rebutting.
Yeah, go relax.
Who is next?
Joseph, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad the ERA came up because it's really interesting the way that's phrased. No discrimination on account of sex. And that leads to something. I'm also glad, Laura, that you mentioned Phyllis Schlafly. Everyone, if you have a chance, watch the Phyllis Schlafly, Betty Friedan debate from about 50 years ago. They talked about a lot of sexual discrimination and segregation issues in colleges and a lot of issues that really relate to what's happening today. So I know it's too late for questions, but something I'd like you to think about, Laura, is what is a woman? There's this guy, Matt Walsh, who made this documentary, What is a Woman?, where he interviews trans activists. Can someone just define themselves as a woman if they were born male, presenting male? Does your belief in pluralism, shouldn't it dictate that groups have the right to decide, all right, you aren't actually a part of this group. We have the right to not be changed by outside forces. We have the right to not be forced to multiculturalism or universalism or anything, and retain our unique cultural identity as women or as trans people. Like, say trans people want to have their own spaces, which they do. Why can't women have that too? So if you want to address that in your closing remarks, please do. I'd like to know whether you think female identifying males should be allowed in locker rooms and bathrooms, and especially even if they should, okay, maybe it's just in the adult world. Maybe adults are mature enough to handle that, but is it really a good idea that we try this out and experiment with minors at high schools where the bathrooms are really underguarded and not being paid attention to, which is probably where most of the assaults and fights are happening. So off that topic, I agree with most of your criticism of Donald Trump and Musk. I have a little bit of nitpicky things about legality and constitutionality. I want to point out that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was against Roe v. Wade. I was against Roe v. Wade too, as a pro-choice person, because I observed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that it doesn't let pro-choice states set more pro-choice standards than the federal standard. So I favor letting states go their different ways on this. And if you feel like answering, I know it's past questions, but if you feel like answering this, would you support a constitutional amendment to make abortion legal nationwide? I disagree with you on Ukraine. It's not a huge deal. You mentioned we shouldn't have to hold ourselves to a promise to Russia that we wouldn't expand eastward. Well, that promise was made 30 years ago. You know what other promise was made 30 years ago? The Budapest Memorandum, where we promised to defend Ukraine as long as they give up their nuclear weapons. So that's an equally old agreement, and I guess we have to pick one. But I don't want to get bogged down on foreign policy. So when I asked my question, I just want to clarify that I didn't mean to suggest by bringing up sex crimes that women are the only victims. I know prison rape exists. I know most of the victims of prison rape are men. I was sexually abused. I was sexually abused by a man. I know that happens. And what I want to talk about is I think there's a growing gulf between men and women that's leading to a difficulty in understanding between the sexes. I saw a TikTok video. This woman puts a camera up in her car and she just screams like a couple times. She doesn't even say anything. And she's clearly just gotten off work. And the comment section is full of men just saying, this is what all women are like, this feminazis, they're crazy. It's like, she's probably tired of being hit on by aggressive men for 8 straight hours and not being able to say anything about it. So, men just see something like that, they want to make fun of them. It's like, this is a person who needs our help. So everyone who's been sexually assaulted or abused, regardless of sex or sexual identification, orientation, needs to band together on this. My brother grew up in a kind of a frat jock environment where he thought rape was funny. I saw an image the other day of a woman at a protest with her mouth covered in duct tape, and on the duct tape it was written, "Still not brave enough to go to the police." So Jordan Peterson has some good things to say, but I think it's kind of appalling the way he doesn't seem to
Time's
realize
up.
Sure, that patriarchy is real. Legal domination, legal professions are dominated by men. They always will be, and we need to.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, who's got the next rebuttal?
We'll do that at the end.
We already done with questions. Who's got the next rebuttal? Anybody?
Who's got the next rebuttal?
I'll go.
All right.
All right. So war certainly, as I think it was Sherman said, is hell. That's certainly true. War is destructive. It's mass slaughter. But sometimes wars are necessary to defend the sovereignty and freedom of a particular country or nation. Because wars are sometimes necessary and sometimes justified and morally just, I am of the mind that if you support defensive wars while claiming an anti-war position, then that is a contradictory, what's the word? Cognitive dissonance, I suppose. I think that to be anti-war is to be very, very, very consistent in your principles, and I just don't think anybody can live to that consistently, especially if, well, yeah, war's okay in defense. It's not that you're against war. It sounds like you're just against aggressive wars or wars of invasion or that sort of thing. With regard to indigenous wisdom, sure, people anywhere in all cultures can be wise, but just just the fact that you are of an indigenous group, or or indigenous people in general somehow have a upper hand when it comes to wisdom or morality or philosophical insight is not true. The noble savage is a myth. As much as European conquest of the Americas was bad, certainly so is sacrificing people for to appease your pantheon. I guess that's all I got to say. Who's got the next rebuttal?
Charlie, go ahead. Charlie, you got your hands raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. First of all, let me thank you, Dr. George, in two respects for your efforts to extend human rights to the feminine community. And number two, for giving and articulating in-depth responses to questions. It's been very refreshing, unlike other speakers, the depth to which you went. I will cover 4 matters rather quickly. Regarding defensive warfare, historians discovered that every single military excursion of the Roman Empire was voted upon by the Roman Senate. They were Stoics, and every single act of war engaged in by ancient Rome was voted upon as necessary for the defense of Rome. So that fallacy is laid to rest. Obviously, the Roman Empire and its endeavors of conquest and acquisition of colonies, they were not doing anything by any means defensive. Number 2, it's been a while since I've kept up with this. I was still am in the United Nations Association, but you referenced the International Criminal Court. From what I understand, the United States will under no circumstances extradite one of its citizens for alleged criminal activity, which I know is passed in Rome with some idea of curtailing crimes against humanity. However, overcoming that hurdle, I'm not certain that is possible. And I see from time to time various individuals like George Bush or Secretary of State is alleged in social media to should be arrested by the ICC. Anyhow, it's interesting to see that you referenced that in one of your programs. Number 3, from a sociological perspective, it is incredibly difficult to change a culture, I think. I'm not certain how culture precisely comes about. It evolves over time, social mores and so forth, standards, and young people are inculcated with a particular culture, trying to change it. It seems to have a tenacious character about it, and it's not easily changed. I'm always amazed that it took decades for women to achieve the right to vote, and to achieve anything more is probably going to take conceivably twice as long. Anyhow, and number 4, I just want to say it must be rather disheartening to have someone like Trump in a position of authority, who is probably the antithesis of the regard of having any sensibility or sensitivity to the women of the nation. He has no regard whatsoever. And I'll just mention one more thing. I think you ought to take perhaps a look, and you might find occasion. I hosted a conference on this, was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think should really mention or inclusion somewhere in your program. Anyhow, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And again, please come again sometime and give us an update on any progress that you've made in founding the Mothers Movement. Thank you very much.
And we'll go to Ellen next, and then we'll go to Jake. Ellen, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Ellen. Thank you for your presentation. I do have some issues with some of the things that you said. Most peace activists are against the war in Ukraine. Just so everyone knows, there's a large movement against it, and most peace activists are against it. Now, I wasn't saying that, you know, like Putin, I'm not,
Just leave that in there.
sorry, I wasn't saying like Putin is a good guy. I think it's really, I think he's a sociopath. I think he's a bad character. However, the reason why I brought up my question is because I think the United States is not an innocent party. We promised that we weren't going to move NATO 1 inch eastward, and we moved like 10 countries eastward. We moved
16.
at least, and I think we have a responsibility. We're not innocent people. I think we are playing with a nuclear power, and we should be cautious when we do that. And I like that the economist Jeffrey Sachs was saying, like, shortly after the war began, they were trying to negotiate peace, the Ukrainians and the Russians, and the US didn't want it. They pushed for Zelensky not to move toward peace, not to try to come to an agreement with Russia. And, you know, I wonder whether this is going to be, well, I actually, maybe because of Trump, it won't be, but, you know, is this going to be another 20-year war that we put our money in? Now, if Trump wanted to take the money going toward Ukraine and put it toward tax breaks, I would probably be in favor of that, because, you know, as a compromise. Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to say. And I also have heard that, like, when the Soviet Union broke up, United States, you know, they wanted to create democracy in Russia, and the United States wouldn't lend any money. We were extremely stingy. We weren't helpful at all. We wanted them to be our enemy. So we certainly do have a lot of responsibility. I also wanted to say the idea of like a global police force. I mean, this is not the way to win people over. You're not going to win people over to your cause. People don't like that kind of stuff. It is just scary. You know, we don't want to concentrate power in a, you know, we have a diversity in terms of our power. We don't want it concentrated in too small of a number of hands. And then I would just like to say, you know, I think your movement has to think about what its goals are. If you want to be talking about enlightenment, you got to stop talking about bad guys, crazy people. You got to talk more like an intellectual. But if you don't want to talk about enlightenment and spirituality, then you can do that. But to go around and talk about people being crazy and bad and evil, and, you know, and then also be talking about, oh, but we're enlightened, you know, those things, you know, Gandhi didn't talk that. I don't think Gandhi talked that way. I mean, if you go to a university and you speak to professors, at least in the classes and stuff, they're not going to talk that way. That's a very unenlightened way of talking. Okay, thank you.
All right, Jake, you're up next. Jake?
Hi,
All
can you
right.
hear me? Okay. Yeah, thank you for your talk. First of all, on the issue of Ukraine, I have no sympathy at all for Putin. This is Putin's Vietnam. He doesn't belong there. I think Putin's got it backwards. NATO will be expanded because of Putin's actions, not the other way around. Again, maybe we made the promise. We also made a promise in 1993 that basically there was a treaty that Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons arsenal to Russia. At that point in time, 40% of the world's nuclear weapons arsenal was located in Ukraine. They gave up their nuclear weapons to Russia. In exchange, U.S. and England were to defend Ukraine in the event that Russia could attack them. So that treaty was signed by Yanushchenko for Ukraine, Boris Yeltsin in Russia, and Bill Clinton co-signed it for the United States. Well, Boris Yeltsin died, Putin took over, and it was Putin who decided to invade Crimea in 2014. That was not our decision, that was his. He doesn't belong there. That's number one. And as I said, NATO will be expanded because of Putin's actions. It's already started. People in Europe are saying if the U.S. backs out of NATO, they'll raise money to keep NATO going on without the U.S. because they feel they need it in order to fight Russian aggression. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the situation between Israel and the Palestinians, that's a very complicated issue. I believe in a two-state solution, which means that both sides have to respect the other.
All right, any other rebuttals? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You got 4 minutes, Bill. Go ahead and give one. Oh, yeah. Mike.
All right. Well, we're dealing in this country with two corrupt industries. One is our Congress, which gets kickbacks from just about every bad industry out there constantly. And then our horrible media empires that are controlled by a few and do not report the truth because they get kickbacks or just bad influence. So those are two things that really are impeding American thought and discussion. I kind of got to hand it to Trump. He stopped 2 wars basically without doing anything. So I think as he listens to Netanyahu's Kool-Aid, Israel's killed 10 times more people than Russia. I hope we all know that. They're a pretty bad country. So I think Trump's kind of like trying to figure this out. I think he's kind of an anti-war president, which is a positive. And I don't completely hate Trump.
Yeah, he just bombed Yemen today.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that, and I don't know. It's probably an economic war. All these wars, by the way, are economic wars. Russia wants that land in Ukraine for their pipelines, for wheat or what have you, or for access to the Mediterranean and ports. So that's what Russia's shooting for. And then Netanyahu, there's a lot of pipelines going through Palestine. So so they want that land. So it's always about resources and land and oil wars, all these wars. It's all about money. So you talk about our speaker speaks about peace, a peace Pentagon, but there's so much money in wars. America spends $1 trillion a year in war. That's why I brought that up. We should call it the War Department again, because it basically goes to wars, non-defensive wars. We jump in and give billions and billions to Israel, billions to Ukraine, which maybe is a little more reasonable war. So, in peace, there's just big industry, big kickbacks to our American politicians. We have 500 people that vote on things in America, and all of them get It turned into a very corrupt America. So that's about all I wanted to say. But I have a very low power for Trump and Musk, and eventually most of their dumb ideas will like be filtered out. I think Trump's just happy he's not in jail. Came like 2 billion votes away from going to jail, and so he's just playing it out, and then he'll just blame Musk and fire him for screwing things up. And then he can go back and fix Tesla, I guess. But I just don't want Trump to continue on wars, fund wars. This creepy Israel, he's gonna. I think he might be able to negotiate Russia, Ukraine, and then I don't want. The minute I'm gonna really turn on Trump is when he gives trillions and trillions of dollars away to the super rich, like he did last time. He gave $4 trillion in tax cuts.
Time.
Not to you. He gave it to the super rich. And now they're talking 5 to 10 trillion. If Trump doesn't give trillions of dollars away to the super rich, then I'll be impressed.
Any more rebuttals? All right. Seeing that there are no rebuttals, we will give it back to our speaker to give a final rebuttal.
All right. One last round of applause. Excellent. Excellent.
It really has been a pleasure being with all of you. This is a group of very thinking humans, and you're my kind of people. We're living in the most complex time in human history because we are all connected, and we're now way beyond navigating the culture we were born into and learning and loving that to living in a world that is bombarding us. The reason that as a futurist, I think women's rights and ending war are the two primary keys to the paradigm shift that we all want, is because balance is what we're seeking. And while we're not going to agree on every detail of what this new world looks like, I think we should very carefully protect some of the essentials, like our freedoms. We're getting also, due to population growth and using up the resources of this planet at an unprecedented rate, in the red zone regarding our own survival. So what we need is an approach that takes all of these factors into account. Back to the phrase unity and diversity. It's a level of respect and acceptance that many humans aren't able to extend others yet. But that is definitely the direction of the evolutionary impulse. Our heroes and heroines are people we admire because they brought sanity in other dark moments of human history. And if we look at all of these teachers who appeared in all over the world to every culture, there were shared values. You know, the mystics of every tradition all spoke the same language, whether, you know, it was Rabia in Islam, or whether it was, you know, the Gnostic Gospels that thankfully were preserved in what I believe is the true teachings of Yeshua. It doesn't matter. You know, you can look at these same principles in the Vedas. It's universal. And it's so simple. It's the golden rule. Okay. It's just so simple. And we need to stop playing lip service to it. And we need to stop only extending that level of compassion and courtesy to people in our immediate vicinity. We're global now. It's a planetary urgency that's upon us. And again, why we think women in war, partnership and peace are the two most important elements to solving all of these elements of the polycrisis is because we all know that when women are in the room, sharing in the conversation, sharing in the decision making, we get better results. We get more compassionate results. And obviously war is, I mean, shame on us. Shame on us that it's the 21st century and we're still making war. For those who see some cognitive dissonance or incompatibility with both being a peace builder and recognizing a sociopath who has to be stopped, I don't know how to help you see that those are not mutually exclusive standpoints. It's just not. I mean, if you know your history from World War II, thank God we finally jumped in, or the whole European continent could have gone dark. So part of it is, at what point do we acknowledge that there's extreme danger? I'm already past that point. I've been worried for well over a decade, if not 2 decades, watching the decline in the democracy index, watching women's rights erode. It's easier to solve a problem before we get to full-on crisis. And we're pretty much on full-on crisis now. And so I'm just going to encourage all the listeners to do whatever feels right to you in service to humanity. And for some people, that's women's rights. And for some people, that's environmental rights. And for some people, that's working in a soup kitchen, you know, at the most grassroots of grassroots levels. It's just a time in human history where all hands are needed on deck. You know, I have colleagues, most of my colleagues, once I left the legal world and entered a more spiritual environment, working on education. And like, if it's almost to the point now where we almost have to even put things that we used to think of as normal peace building on the back burner while we address the catastrophes that are right, you know, right up at our nose now. So while yes, and 20 years ago, you know, education. And right now we've reached a point where if we don't protect our freedoms, we are going to lose them in a big way. And I do believe that's what the oligarchs are planning. I think that's why Trump has had a fascination and an admiration and what is it, the bro romance thing going on with Putin and Kim Jong-un. Project 2025 was brainstormed mostly overseas. They went to study how Viktor Orban so quickly decimated that democracy. Time is of the essence. Do what you feel is best and where your skill set lies and how you can be in service in the best way possible. I think that's how I want to end. Just everybody do your best right now, because we need everybody operating at peak proficiency for one another. It's the golden rule of the global level. It's time. We got to prove that we've learned our lessons. It's time.
Okay, on that note, our college of complexes stands adjourned. I'd like to thank Justin tonight for moderating and all of you for attending. And with that, I'm gonna talk. And with that, we're gonna stop. The college is now formally adjourned.